Why do 84% of reorgs fail? That's what we're going to explore today on this first episode in the Reorg Resilience podcast series. And I'm thrilled to have my guest, Chealsea Wierbonski, with me here today. Welcome, Chealsea, to the Mindful Fire podcast.
Thanks so much, Adam. I'm so happy to be here today.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm so grateful to you for being the first guest on the first episode ever of the first live episode ever of the Mindful Fire podcast. And we both know that reorgs are happening now more than ever before. They are happening across tech, and seems to be picking up. And so I thought it'd be really helpful to get you on the podcast and to explore this concept because whether we like it or not, we're probably going to go through a reorg or lead a team through a reorg at some point. And part of the path to financial independence and building a life you love is building resilience to navigate these ups and downs. So really thrilled to be here to explore this from both the individual contributor side, but also the leadership side. And so thank you again for being here.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited to talk to everyone today and to have this conversation with you.
Yeah. And I'd love to welcome the people who are tuning into the live stream and all of the people who are joining us here in the studio. And if you'd like to join us here in the studio, we're going to do a Q&A, a live Q&A with Chealsea at the end of the episode. And so I invite you to join us here live in the studio at mindfulfire.org/live. Just put in your name and email address, and you will be brought right into this studio room here. So we look forward to having you here, and we'll remind you again towards the end. But thank you for everyone who is here in the room with us. It's great to have you here, and we'll be doing the Q&A at the end. So Chealsea, let's start at the top. Why is it so important to build resilience in the face of reorgs? Like, why are these things happening so often, and what can we do to prepare?
Well, I think the reason they're happening so often is really because it's been a time of contraction for a lot of companies. And, at first it was the post COVID contraction where companies were cutting back expenses because they kind of over committed themselves financially right after or during COVID. And now with AI, so many companies are spending money on machine resources and whatnot. And spending is just kind of at an all-time high. So I think the reason we're seeing reorgs is because projects are getting cut, things are getting reprioritized, people are getting moved around. So there's just a lot, roles are getting eliminated. And anytime you do that, you have to make changes to the organizational structure. So I think that's kind of the background about why they're happening.
Makes sense, yeah. And so you've seen it from both sides of the table, so to speak. You've been a leader leading teams through reorgs as a group product manager at Google and other places. And you've also been through many reorgs as an individual contributor. Like, what are the things that you've seen go wrong when these reorgs happen?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, like on the leadership side, is the time it takes to land them and the hesitation. Um, like reorgs can be a little bit chaotic. A lot of people don't really have a clear picture of what the reorg actually means. So it takes a minute to kind of figure out, what people's new roles are, who's going to be doing what. Sometimes you have duplicative roles or like duplicative teams coming together, and then you sort of have to figure out, well, like who's going to be doing this job now? We have like two or three people doing the same job. So on the leadership side, I think it's really comes down to sort of hesitating and trying to figure things out. But then on the individual contributor side, reorgs are destabilizing. So questions come up about like, what is this team? What's the identity? What's my role on it? Maybe I was a superstar on the old team. Am I still going to be considered a high performer? Is my new manager going to understand what I do? So I think there's just a lot of questions that create some destabilization on the IC side.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah, I'm just making sure that we are live here on LinkedIn. I hope it's working. If you're in the room with us here, would love for you to just kind of say hello in the chat just so we can see that you're here as well. That would be awesome. And there we go. Hi. Cool. So let's start at the leadership side. Let's start at the leadership side, and let's talk about what I've seen. I've been through 11 reorgs in the last 10 years at Google. my last 10 years at Google, it seemed like it was happening every 6 to 12 months. And, I've seen the good and the bad and the ugly on that. So I think for me, what I've noticed is that there's just a kind of destruction of trust, and psychological safety, right? Google did that study that shows that the best teams are the ones where people feel safe to take risks, speak up, and kind of put themselves out there. After a reorg, especially after a layoff, I've seen that just go quiet, right? Your best, most creative people just kind of put their head down. They don't want to, they don't want to be next, right? And so kind of what have you seen show up when a reorg happens within a team, and we can talk, well, first we'll talk about like what's going on there, and then we can dive into what the solutions are.
Yeah, so I think to your point, like there's an erosion of trust. Whether or not that's actually based in reality is, I mean, it's a subjective thing and every reorg is different. But I think anytime you're in a situation where there are a lot of unknowns, people get scared because they don't know their new manager, they don't know their new teammates, they don't know what it means for their future. So yeah, there's a loss of trust there. And when you're a leader trying to manage your own sort of feelings and emotions around a reorg and your own sense of loss of trust alongside all of these people that you're managing is really challenging. And I think that's something that people often don't think about in the corporate world because we like to think that our emotions are sort of separate from work. But regardless of whether or not you're a person that processes your emotions externally, you're still experiencing them internally. Even if you try to push them out of your mind, it's still happening. And it's only natural for people to maybe get triggered, and especially fear gets triggered. And then they sort of behave in ways that are maybe counterproductive or not as effective. And, like on the leadership side, for example, if you don't know sort of like how your new team fits into the broader organization, that can also create fear. And then you're kind of viewing this big change through that lens. And I think when you're operating from that state, it becomes a little bit more difficult to help create psychological safety with your team because you're experiencing a lack of psychological safety. So I don't know if you felt anything like that in these situations at Google, or if you can relate to that at all. But the thing that comes to mind for me with a loss of trust is fear getting triggered, and then of course anxiety and all of the things that go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good point. Like, yeah, having been through it as an IC, right? Like, I'm so consumed in trying to navigate it and find my way and figure out what my job is and who my teammates are and where we're going. But to be honest, like that's happening to my manager as well, and probably their manager. Like a lot of times these decisions, especially layoff decisions, are happening so far up the chain that it affects everyone all the way down, and everyone's feeling that same fear. And so it's really important that we, kind of acknowledge that, feel what we're actually feeling, and start to move forward and rebuild that trust and that confidence. And I have thoughts on how that is best done or best led through how that psychological safety, how that trust is rebuilt. But what have you seen work, that either you have done as a leader or that great leaders that you've worked for have done to make that happen?
Well, I think, before I go too specific on the solution, I just want to
Yeah.
touch on one thing that you said because I think it's super interesting. You, I think we often forget that when we're in a corporation or a company, regardless of whether it's big or small, because there's a hierarchy there, we assume that the people above us have sort of like that they're not feeling things. We think they're immune to these experiences. And you make a good point because the people, it doesn't matter like how senior you are, everyone is having their own human experience. So I think one of the things you can do regardless of where you are in that hierarchy is just remember, like, whatever you're feeling, other people are feeling their version of it. So in terms of like things you can do as a manager to recreate that sense of psychological safety, I think the first thing is in situations where it's like two teams coming together, or maybe you had an existing team and like a new team is coming in, is to really try to make those new people feel welcome. and to try to get to know them and to reassure them that you want to get to know their work, you want to get to know them, you want to understand the kind of value that they bring to the table, not in a way that makes them feel like you're evaluating them because you want to ultimately lay them off or cut their role, but because you want to understand them and you want to support them. So I think any type of reassurance that you can give as a leader is important. And then also one of the things that I think is important to be aware of is like what are the sort of cultural differences on the team? So like does one team have a totally different way of working from the one that's coming in? And if so, how are you going to reconcile those two things? That's another thing that I think comes up that can be problematic. And then the other thing is if there's overlap in people's roles, really taking a proactive effort and helping them to figure out like what is their new place on this new team. Because I will tell you, one of the worst, this isn't quite a reorg, it was an acquisition, but one of, I would say, the worst experiences I've been through is when Google bought DoubleClick. And it was basically like two teams of product managers coming together, and there was like two of everybody. And the manager at the time, the attitude was like, well, you guys will just figure it out. And I think as a manager and a leader, one of your responsibilities is to figure that out. Like you can't leave it up to the people on the team to figure it out. It's your job to figure out what the organizational structure will look like. And if you don't do that, then that creates like competitiveness amongst people. People start getting like really territorial and, sort of adopt this scarcity mindset where they're keeping information and knowledge from each other. And that just creates a potentially a toxic culture on the team, which damages productivity. So, in the end, you actually do yourself a bigger service if you try to think, be aware of where all of these potential issues are and then try to figure out a way to navigate it instead of just not looking at it and worrying about your own position in whatever new structure is being formed.
Yeah, I love that. That makes so much sense because, yeah, so many times it's just been like, this is your new team, this is your new role. We've got a 130 slide deck that McKinsey gave us, but you go ahead, read the deck, and just figure it out. It's all good. But no, you need to actively think about as a leader, where are we going? What do we need to get there? And who has the skill sets in what roles to make this actually happen? Another thing that I think is often left to chance is just the idea of a shared vision, right? This a total lack of clarity, right? I think back to my latest reorg. They created a new role, merged two organizations together, and everything about my job was new. New people, new team, a new manager, new role, new clients, new everything. And it was just like, what is this? Where are we going with this? What is the vision that we have? Like, how are we going to be delivering for our clients? What does that do for the overall organization? And then where do I fit in? And so I find that just that lack of clarity causes so much swirl and is why most reorgs take 6 to 9 months to land. And then you're 3 months from the next reorg. And so I'm on a mission to help leaders speed up that speed to alignment by getting everyone on the same page, working together, talking together, and moving forward together. What have you seen, kind of that lack of clarity? Like, how does that show up? Is that common in the reorgs that you've been through?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that is so common. And I think, as a product manager, I can speak a lot to vision because, like, sometimes you don't know what your vision is going to be. And I think that's okay. Sometimes you have to make organizational decisions for financial reasons or, some other reasons besides like a vision for where you want the company to go. And maybe you don't know what the vision is going to be for this new team. I think that's fine, but you have to communicate that to people. So
Right.
you have to at least acknowledge that maybe we don't have like the vision fully defined yet, but here's sort of some ideas that we have. And here's what you can do in the interim to help support that initial idea. And, FYI, this is going to evolve over time, but this is what we think so far. And at least then you're kind of owning up to the fact that maybe you don't have it all figured out yet. You acknowledge it, you help the individual contributors on the team to not feel crazy, for assuming that things are chaotic, and you make it you give them that reassurance that you're working to figure things out, which I think is important, because one of the biggest misconceptions I think about leadership is that you have to know everything or you have to figure things out. And I think it's much more valuable, and ICs appreciate it much more, or even like, managers, like first level managers appreciate it more when you just acknowledge the challenges that you're facing. It's much more authentic, it's more vulnerable, people can relate to that, and that just, by default generates trust and psychological safety, because then you create this feeling of like, oh, okay, we're all in this together, we're figuring it out. And then you might have to have a couple of different touch points where you're like, this is taking us a little longer than we thought, please be patient. The worst thing you can do as a leader is to act like nothing's happening, and to not acknowledge that there's no vision, and to not acknowledge that things are chaotic. Because then the people on the team start talking, they start gossiping, it just it creates like this hotbed of toxicity. And I've never understood why more people just don't be honest about what's happening. It's fine.
Right. We're all figuring it out, right? Like
Exactly,
even in the
exactly.
best of circumstances, we're all just figuring it out. And so acknowledging that and just showing that you are a human being figuring it out. This was a change for you as well as a leader. And just acknowledging that and being real about it. Yeah, absolutely. Will put people at ease. It will generate that trust, that psychological safety, because you are modeling it. And
Right.
then it creates a space where, a situation where it's like, let's create this together, right? I totally agree.
Right.
A lot of times these changes are happening for economic reasons, cost saving, whatever they might be. But that doesn't change the fact that, you know, we have a new team and we have to work together and we have to go somewhere together. If you haven't set out that vision, and even if you have, I find it really, really valuable to get the people in the room, get them talking to each other, and get them collaborating from the get-go, right?
Yeah,
Y-
for
You know,
sure.
yeah, and I lead this workshop, as you know, because we met in my workshop, the Ask What's Possible workshop. I've been leading it for teams at Google, outside of Google, that are in this situation. They just went through a reorg. They have a new team. They need to get everyone together, get them on the same page, and get them productive as soon as possible. And so my approach is get them talking to each other from the very beginning. And in the session that we did together, it was exactly that. A bunch of teams from all over the world coming together for the first time. Some of them knew each other, some of them didn't. We got them talking to each other. We got them dreaming big about what do I want for my life, right? This is something that we can talk about a little bit more on the IC side. Having a clear vision for your life is a game changer. And most people never make the time to actually ask these big questions of themselves. And so that's where we start. That brings the energy up. Then we transition to what, in that situation, what does the industry look like? Where is this industry going? We were talking to the search team. What is search going to look like 3 years from now? And how do we as a team want to work together to meet that moment and to make that vision a reality? And then finally, creating alignment. There's alignment within the team, right? Everyone knows what their role is, how they're contributing to the vision. But then how does that help me get towards what I want to do, towards my vision? And so we finish the workshop usually with, how do I want to contribute to this big team vision, and how does that help me move towards my vision? That way I'm personally invested. And I think that's the step that most people skip, if they even get the team alignment piece done and have the clarity. But I think there's so many benefits to bringing the team in to the process, because they feel ownership and they feel like they are actually part of it. They're making it happen. It's not happening to them.
Right, right. Yeah, and in fact, when you first mentioned coming together, I immediately thought of your workshop, because in that particular case, we were a few different teams coming together, and we were very geographically distributed. So there wouldn't have been a chance really for me to meet any of those people in person. And that is the first great thing about it, is that I feel like anytime you meet somebody in person, you just form a connection with them. And so then you're more likely to want to support each other because you have sort of like a friendly, like a work friend bond, you know?
Hmm.
It's harder to do that over like remotely and doing video conferencing. But your workshop in particular, I think, encouraged a level of authenticity and vulnerability that helped people to really connect with each other and talk to each other. And then also you bring in the vision part of that. It felt collaborative. I really do feel like it set us on a really, powerful trajectory because I feel really close to that team now. And many of them live in Tel Aviv. Some of them live in Tokyo. So it's, like I said, New York, California, it's very distributed. And there's with the time zones and stuff, there's just no chance that I would really get to develop that kind of relationship with those people. So I found it really powerful for that reason. And definitely agree with you 100% about the vision. I know we're going to talk about that more in the IC section. But yeah, that's something that people don't take the time to do because they spend their entire sort of like career life just going from milestone to milestone without really stopping to check in with themselves to make sure, like, is this really what I want? You know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I know
Just
you know.
chasing that next promotion, just
Right.
trying to survive the next layoff. We always think that like, oh, like if only this, then I'll be happy, right? Like if I just make it through this, then I'll have the space and time to think about what I actually want. And the same thing's true of teams, right? If we don't actively create space to think about where we want to go as a team. And one of the things I also encourage people to do is to set aside the limitations, the constraints, the ideas of what's realistic or rational, right? And think like, if I could do anything, what would I do? Right? What would we do? What would we build if we could do anything, if resources were no object? And obviously that's not the world that we live in. There are constraints. But setting those constraints aside for a moment can open possibilities that you would never even otherwise consider. And usually there's a way to get there, right? And if we just open our minds to those possibilities, we now can start to figure out, okay, cool. We have a room full of the best people at Google, the best and brightest at Google. We can figure out how to get there, right? But without having that space and creating that container where people can ask those big questions of themselves and of the team, it's just not going to happen. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
totally. I 100% agree with that. And I think what comes to mind when you're saying that is like the scarcity versus the abundance mindset, or some people call it the
Hmm.
growth mindset, right? And it's pretty common, I feel like, in companies to have more of a scarcity mindset where you only notice like the difficulties and the impossibilities and the resource constraints and that's understandable, especially now. But when you do that, you're limiting your creativity, you're limiting your innovation because you're shutting yourself down before you've given yourself a chance to explore what's possible. And to your point, you know, you can always find a way. Like maybe it's not going to be exactly the way that you think, or it might look a little bit different on the other side, but there's always a way. And that's the spirit of tech. Is like being creative, being innovative, having big ideas. And I feel like we've lost a little bit of that right now as the industry has gotten more mature.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, we're in this world where everyone's like investing in AI and thinking AI can do everything. And what I'm seeing is it just creates a situation where everyone can sprint faster in different directions, right?
Right.
Like and just kind of outsource their thinking, right? I've done it
Right.
myself. I'm like, just write this for me. It's like, yeah, well, that's not quite right. And it's like I got to start from scratch. But you first have to figure out where you want to go, how it's going to work together, and then how
Hmm.
we're going to use AI to move us in that direction.
Right.
And so and so I guess first I'd say like if people want to do this work, if they want to accelerate their reorg from landing in a few quarters, 6 to 9 months, to 2 to 3 weeks, I invite them to set up a time with me to chat about that in my Ask What's Possible workshop. We'll discuss your situation, and you can do that at askwhatspossible.com/fit. Just a 15-minute fit call, see if it makes sense. And also, if people individuals want to get clear on where they want to go, they want to do this exercise that we did in the workshop, you can do that at mindfulfire.org/start. That's just a simple envisioning exercise that'll get you to set aside those constraints, think bigger about what's possible, and create a bigger vision for your life. So let's switch gears now, Chealsea, and let's get into the individual contributor side, right? I know you do a lot of work as a coach, helping people level up in their careers and build confidence in their careers. I guess someone's going through a reorg. What advice would you give them? Or they know a reorg's coming, or they're worried a reorg's coming, right? Because that's where it really starts beforehand.
Right. I mean, a few things there, I would say. Usually people start getting worried about a reorg because they worry what it means for them. They worry that, maybe it means their job is in trouble, or they're not going to like their new manager, or maybe not like their new teammates. And it's really easy for our mind to start spinning all these fearful stories. So I think the first thing you can do is to remind yourself that when you're in that state, really what's happening is your nervous system is just getting activated, because here's this big thing and it's a big unknown and you don't know what it means. And what I mean when I say your nervous system is getting activated, I just mean that that's like your survival response, kicking in. I know you know this, Adam, but in some ways, like, our brains still have, like, the amygdala, the lizard brain, as they call it, is really hyperactive. It gets activated really easily. So anytime we sense a threat, or we, feel like our position is in danger, then the flight, fight, or freeze response kicks in. And then that's when we start having all these fearful thoughts. And they're not really based in reality. We're just telling ourselves stories about what might happen. And usually those stories are really negative. So I think one of the things that people can do is to sort of change that perspective and remind themselves, well, actually, I don't really know. Like, I don't really know how this is going to end up. I don't really know, if it's going to be bad. It could be great. And the other thing to remember is, like, you don't have to stay in these situations. You always have a choice. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but there's alternatives. You don't have to stay in these roles, even though it might seem like it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it's funny. I don't like in the times where I went through that, it was not clear. Like, in my mind, I thought, oh, I'll just navigate this. It'll be fine. I'll figure it out, and it'll be fine. But in the reality, like, some of those times, I should have probably started looking. Right? I probably
Right.
should looking at a new opportunity. But just kind of to the point of what you were saying about our stories creating our reality, right? Or the stories that we're telling ourselves. One of the things I always say in my teaching is that our stories create our reality. The way that our brain works, the fact that everything we think, feel, and pay attention to changes the structure and function of our brain, and
Right.
that's neuroplasticity, and that influences what our brain predicts and expects to happen. It's essentially like we're telling ourselves stories about how our life is going to be, and then we're acting out those stories.
Yeah.
We can become aware of those stories, right? This podcast is all about mindfulness, right? Mindfulness allows us to notice, oh, there's that story again. I keep telling myself this. And, the first few times you have, you're going through something difficult, you're going through a big change, like, let yourself feel that. Let yourself tell that story of, oh, I'm afraid, or I don't know what's going to happen. But the question I like to ask myself to interrupt that is this useful? Is this useful? Is this moving me towards what I want? Or is this just causing me suffering? And if it's not useful, I can just choose to let it go. It might come up, 5 minutes from now, but over and over again, I can ask, is this useful? And I think
Right.
that's really helpful in these scenarios, because whether we're expecting a reorg or a layoff or whatever it might be, we can't control that. And so it's not so useful to spend our time and energy and effort thinking about that or strategizing about situations that may never even happen. And we can kind of interrupt that and move forward.
Yeah, totally. And now we're touching on, I think, one particular topic that you and I are both super passionate about, which is, like, the power of your mind to create your reality. And just going back to what you said a few minutes ago, with I just want to reiterate that your mind has a filter in it. It's called the reticular activating system, the RAS. And that filter is based on, as you said, the stories that you tell yourself. So if you're constantly telling yourself things like, this isn't going to work, or this reorg is going to be terrible for me, or I don't have a choice, or this is the only job I can do, then that's what you see.
Hmm.
Whereas if you're open to possibility and you're open to new ideas and things working out differently, your mind is able to perceive more opportunity because you're bombarded with millions of bits of information like every second or something like that. And your mind
Hmm.
just can't process it all. So it has to use that filter to filter out information that's not important. And the way that it decides what is important is by what you pay attention to and the stories that you tell yourself. When you do that, you're telling your brain to what to prioritize. So if you want it to prioritize different experiences, the trick is to tell yourself a different story. And that is automatically how you change your life. And some people might think that sounds woo-woo, but it's not. It's neuroscience. It's the way your
Yeah.
mind works. There's nothing woo-woo about it at all.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I focus so much on the neuroscience, right? Like I came up as a facilitator training Googlers and engineers and product managers, and they're not into the woo woo, right? And so I
Right.
keep it very based on the science. And I find it much more practical, right? If you tell someone, "Oh, you got to raise your vibe to get what you want," like, how do I raise my vibe? That doesn't make any sense to me. But if I tell someone the story you tell yourself, that story you tell yourself about having bad that you have bad luck, and then you have bad luck in your life, those things are connected. So if you
Right.
choose to a new story, or even just ask, is this useful, and let it go, and every time you notice yourself telling yourself that unhelpful story, you just choose to let it float away like a cloud in the sky, you kind of let those quote unquote mental muscles of that story atrophy, and you create space for a new story. And then as you
Right.
start to practice that new story, I talk about this a lot as planting seeds. Every thought or story you tell yourself is like planting or watering a seed. And every time you think those thoughts or those stories, you are watering that seed. And not
Right.
surprisingly, that seed grows into your life. And so
Right.
if you start to plant new seeds, you create a new story and you create a new reality.
Right, 100%. And I have a similar thing that I ask myself when I catch myself thinking, things that I don't want to be thinking. Is this absolutely true? Do
Hmm.
I know that this is true? Because I think sometimes people confuse fear with facts.
Hmm.
And we confuse these limiting beliefs that we have with facts. I mean, that's the definition of a limiting belief. It's like so deeply embedded in your
Yeah.
subconscious that you believe it to be true, but they're just beliefs which can be changed. And I think the really interesting thing about limiting beliefs is that they are formed when you're a child. So as an adult, you're running this outdated software in your mind. Like you are operating like with this belief system that was formed 40, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and living your life from that perspective because it's
Hmm.
driving all of your behavior. And so I think one of the tricks to having like a really, whether it's a successful career or a successful life, is to update that operating system or those subconscious programs by identifying what they are to begin with and then changing the story, right? Otherwise, you're being like, every one of your actions is basically being driven by like, 7-year-old you or 10-year-old you.
Yeah. Yeah, and so how can people take this concept and this knowledge that we are telling ourselves stories, whether we're aware of it or not, we are. How can they use this information to set themselves up for success in the context of a reorg?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I help a lot of my coaching clients with. I mean, I think the first step in any of this stuff, and we kind of talked about it earlier, is to become aware of what you're telling yourself. And since many of these beliefs are subconscious, sometimes it's hard to do that. And so the way that I always advise people to figure out what those things are is to pay attention to how you feel.
Hmm.
Because when you're in a situation and you get triggered, then that indicates that there's a fear response happening. And where there's a fear response, there's an underlying belief about what your interpretation is of the situation. So if it's about a reorg, if you're starting to feel like, oh, I don't want to share this information with my new teammate because they might steal my job, or somebody might think that they're better at the job than I am. That's and usually when you think that, there's a feeling that comes with it. It's like a feeling of tension or anxiety or like territorialism. Being aware of when those feelings come up, then you can be like, wait a minute, I don't know this person. Do I know that they're trying to sabotage me? No. And then kind of being more open to trying to support your new colleague and work together and create an environment of collaboration. And someone might say, well, I feel that person being that way too. That's why I'm being like that. But the thing that you have to keep in mind that I think is really important is sometimes we lose compassion for each other in these corporate environments, and we forget, like, if you're struggling and you're feeling them struggle, that means they're struggling also. So they're likely having a similar experience to you. And the quickest way to diffuse something like that is to create a collaborative environment and try to work with them and help them to feel safe and seen and heard. And then before you know it, that sort of like territorialism, and competitiveness just disappears because they don't view you as a threat anymore. And then you're helping each other, which is like way less stressful. It's a lot more fun, and it results in sort of like team performance being uplifted, and it ensures the success of a reorg, as opposed to everyone being all like, oh, I'm going to compete with everybody and it's every person for themselves. That's just like a terrible environment, and it's super
Yeah.
stressful.
Yeah, it just feels better. I love that. I wasn't thinking about that initially, but absolutely. Your body is sending you signals all the time, right? If your jaw is
Right,
clenched or you're feeling tight or you're feeling exhausted, right? All of that is information, and you can
right,
kind of tune into that and start to decode it, right? And the more you practice, I say practice mindfulness of just, this is what I'm feeling. Okay. Why might I be
right.
feeling that, right? It just takes self-compassion first to understand, what am I feeling? Why might I be feeling it? Another thing that's been really helpful for me in these like overwhelming moments is just journaling. Just take a pen and a paper and just write whatever comes to mind, right? Especially for me when I have things swirling around my head and, just bouncing around, I need to get it out of my head onto paper, which first
Totally.
immediately makes me feel lighter. And then it helps with clarity because now it's there. I can see it. I can work with it. And, you know, with AI, it's even helping it with that as well, because you can turn that, you know, maybe not with your handwriting necessarily, but if you just record something and just get it all out, um, it can help you parse that and understand like what are the themes in there and things. But you could always
Totally.
just read it as well. But getting it out of your head onto paper has been a game changer for me when I'm feeling overwhelmed or uncertain or anything like that.
For sure, me too. And I think I use AI for that all the time, ChatGPT, to kind of process what's going on, and identify themes. And I think one of the really interesting things about journaling is like oftentimes you don't even realize what you're thinking, but
Right.
then when you sit down, stuff just starts coming out of you. So I
Hmm.
think that's kind of like a really good bridge to reaching your subconscious. And then to your point, when you see it on paper, then you kind of have to admit to yourself, okay, now that I'm seeing this here, I realize that that was sort of like, ambiently driving my behavior. Because a lot of the times, like, especially now, if you work in a big or small company, a startup, there's a lot of pressure to perform, and everybody's moving really fast and just constantly hitting deadlines and milestones, and it's like a very intense environment, so you don't always take the time to check in with yourself and try to understand what exactly is going on. And it's easy to just push that stuff out of your mind. And then if you layer on top of that the fact that it's sort of like frowned on and socially unacceptable to be quote unquote emotional at work, the minute somebody starts feeling something, they like sweep it under the rug. They don't want to feel it. They don't want to deal with it. They just have to focus on work. And then I think that's why we get in these situations where then we're laying in bed at night ruminating over the day, and like we can't fall asleep because our mind is swirling about a conversation we had or something somebody said to us. And all of that stuff is unprocessed emotion, and your nervous system is getting activated because it's feeling threatened, or you're feeling threatened. And so therefore your
Yeah.
nervous system reacts.
Oh yeah, I'm having flashbacks. I'm having flashbacks to laying awake at night, waking like going to bed first. Last thing I think is about the situation. Waking up, it's about the situation. It's like that's not healthy. And so
No,
there are steps that we can take. I mean, just sitting in meditation,
for
following your
sure.
breath. When your mind wanders away to that situation or anything else, just notice it with kindness, a kind, curious awareness. Bring it back over and over again. And then the journaling, just get it out of your head. Write whatever you need to write, right? No one needs to read it, right? You can literally, I've done this. I've literally ripped it up and thrown it out immediately afterwards. But I felt better. I felt lighter and more clear after that. Because
Yeah,
we just build up, and that fear response is very real, and we are wired for that, right? Like
for
there's a negativity
sure.
bias.
Yeah, and also it's just survival. It's like
Hmm.
human, it's our
Yeah,
animal instinct coming out. That's all that is.
absolutely.
And one of the things that I try to teach my clients is like just to remember that that is just a nervous system response. It's like if you put
Right.
your hand on a hot stove, it would feel painful.
Hmm.
But you know what that is. Like with your nervous system, sometimes it's confusing because we're so merged with our feelings and
Hmm.
we don't create enough space to know like, okay, I'm just getting activated right now. Like I don't have to attach a story to this, and
Yeah.
make it mean something bigger than it is. It's just my body is just responding, and it's like an autonomic response. We can't help it. And I think another thing that gets kind of dangerous is that not only do you have that fear, but then sometimes if you're like for me, I was a woman in tech trying to step into leadership. When I would feel those feelings, part of me would be like, real leaders don't feel like that.
Mm.
Or if you were a leader, you wouldn't feel that way. And or you're bad at your job, you can't do this. And so then that starts like a shame spiral on top of it
Hmm.
where you're
Oh yeah.
not only feeling afraid, but then you're beating yourself up for how you're feeling. And so now you're processing two different intense and negative feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of all goes back to what you were saying around like we are so merged with our feelings that and these stories that we've practiced for decades that we feel like it's true, and we need
Right.
to create some distance, like getting it out on paper or telling it to a friend. Like the way we talk to ourselves in our head, we would never talk to even our
Oh,
worst
yeah.
enemy sometimes,
Right.
so it's like you need to create some space, you need to get some objectivity to these stories and realize like you can choose a new story. And so I'm curious, Chelsea, you know, we talked earlier about vision, but is there anything that you do with your clients to help them think bigger about their life and create that vision for their life? I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm happy to share kind of how having a clear vision helped me, but really curious on the work you do with your clients.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because I think I work with a lot of women in tech and people in demanding jobs, and so they're very analytical. And the one thing that I try to tell them when they create a vision is like, don't worry about logistics. Don't worry about the how. Because
Hmm.
what I find is when people start trying to do visioning exercises, they're like writing down their vision and then they're like, oh, but that can't be my vision
Mm.
because I would have to do X, Y, and Z, or this would happen and I wouldn't be able to do this. And then they get caught up in the logistics of it and don't actually get to the visioning part. So, one of the things I try to teach them is to relax, meditate beforehand, and clear space in their mind and focus on an image and also how they want to feel. So, not
Mm.
like, what am I going to do? Or like, what's my specific role? Or what are the specific steps I need to get there? But how do you see your life? And when it comes to the feelings, it's things like, well, I want more freedom. I want to feel a sense of abundance. I want to feel, intellectually stimulated or fulfilled. Those were all things that were really important to me. And then practice feeling those feelings now. And then do that, for 60 to 90 seconds every day. And then when you're in your life and actually doing the logistics, that feeling will guide you and you'll start following the vision without even knowing it. Because
Mm.
going back to what we said earlier about your mind kind of having that filter, when you teach it that no, actually these feelings are important and this vision are important, it automatically finds opportunities that lead you down that path.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what
Yeah.
I try to teach them to do.
I love that so much. Yeah, that's a huge thing that I focus on in my workshops and when I was doing group coaching. And it's how do you want to feel, right? How do you want to feel personally? And then in the team setting, how do you want this team to feel, right? Like, because teams
Right.
have a feeling too, right? Competitive is a feeling, territorial is a feeling, collaborative, kindness, those are also
Right.
feelings.
Empathy,
Empathy, right?
the big
Care,
one.
right? Like
Yeah.
these things are also feelings that we can choose. And that's the thing that I think about when I think about my vision. It's I want to feel unrushed, right? Like, and
Yeah.
I'm 1 year out from working at Google. I'm into my semi early retirement, whatever I'm calling it, where I'm building this business. But my vision was always to be unrushed, feel unrushed, build this business in my own time, in my own way. And that's been a guiding force for me. And there have been a lot of times where I've been forcing the business, trying to get
Yeah.
workshops, trying to get leads, trying to do this and that. And it felt bad. It felt like rushing and forcing. And I want to be more in the allowing and unrushed
Yes.
type of thing. And just generally, I notice that I'm, not as nice of a dad and a husband and a person when I'm rushed, right? And so I really love that question of how do you want to feel?
100%.
Yeah. And then just on this topic of like once just entertaining a bigger vision for your life opens the puts the wheels in motion in your brain to start moving towards that, right? Because of the predictive nature of our brain. Um, and for me, like I had an example where I wanted to, I had this crazy idea. All of my things start as crazy ideas. I wanted to lead a workshop for Sundar Pichai's team. He's the CEO of Google, as you know. And I
Wait, who
wanted
is
to,
he?
yeah, right. Just announced a $100 billion quarter yesterday. Kind of a big deal. Obviously, have no connections to him. And I wanted to do this, but I had no idea about how. Right? I love what you said about don't worry about the how. Not important at this point in time. When you're doing visioning, when you're getting clear on what you want, don't worry about the how. It doesn't even matter. I thought that, and I was like, that would be awesome, right? And I started, taking little actions, having conversations with administrative business partners because I wanted to do workshops. It wasn't necessarily to get to Sundar, right? Because that seems so unrealistic. But one thing led to another. I got an email at 11:30 at night on September 27th, 2023. I was up finishing all my work for Q3, tying up loose ends. I got this email from a woman named Mary. She said, "We're looking for someone to lead a mindful leadership workshop for a group of executives." I'm like, cool, that's right aligned with my vision of wanting to lead these workshops for teams and companies. Had a conversation with her the next day. She's like, would you be okay with if it was about 100 SVPs and VPs at Sundar's leadership conference? I was like, perfect. Like that's exactly what I wanted. Right. And so another thing you said is first, don't worry about the how, right? I obviously could not make a plan to get there. The second thing is be open to how it happens, when it happens, and expect it to look different, right? Did I
Right.
did I do the workshop for Sundar? No. But did I do it for a group of VPs and SVPs at his leadership conference? Absolutely, right? And so some
Amazing.
people might consider that a loss. I consider that a huge win. It has set my entire business forward because I have that credibility. And that would have never happened if I hadn't opened my mind to like, what do I really want? What would be awesome? Right?
Right. Or if you would have told yourself, oh, that's impossible, I could never do that, I better down level my thinking to something
Right.
more realistic. I think that's what people
Right.
do. Also, that gets them in trouble with visioning and why some people think it sounds corny or it doesn't work
Yeah.
because they automatically assume they can't do it. and they start
Yeah.
telling themselves all the reasons why it won't work out. Well, guess what? If you tell yourself it's not going to work out, it won't work out,
Your
you know?
story creates your reality. That's what I tell
Exactly,
my kids all
exactly.
the time.
Yeah.
So I love that. Yeah, that is so important, and I'm glad we covered that. And let's talk. I know you had something you wanted to chat about someone who's early in their career and they're a re, a reorg comes their way and they might be really shaken by it.
Right.
Um, I'll hand it over to you. Kind of talk about how you would advise somebody. I mean, early in career or otherwise. I mean, we all suffer with these same things, but let's use that example.
Yeah, for sure. So I think one thing that we lose sight of when we're working is we forget that we are autonomous human beings with our own life, and we get to say like what's okay with us and what's not okay with us. And a lot of the times we have these stories about, oh, I have to log in when I get home or I'll get fired, or I have to do this, or, people are going to think I'm not committed. But usually no one notices. And the other thing is that in order to survive something as destabilizing as a reorg, you really have to set boundaries. So important, especially now because things are so crazy. And so I actually have this really great worksheet that I call Boundary Setting for Burnout Guide, which helps people learn how to set boundaries so that they don't get burned out. Because I think one of the common misconceptions about burnout is that people assume it's related to the amount of work that you're doing. But in fact, burnout is actually because you're emotionally burnt out. So if you're in a role where there's a lot of stress, or you are, logging on all the time and then not getting enough rest, not taking care of yourself, and your body's in like, this fight, flight, or freeze mode all of the time, you're going to get burned out because you're going to get emotionally drained. And so that's why it's so important to learn how to set boundaries. It's okay. You're everyone does it. At least people who are able to survive working in corporate for a really long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the final thing I wanted to chat about before we get into Q&A, and again, if you're listening to this live, you're on the live stream, but you're not in the room with us, I invite you to join us live by going to mindfulfire.org/live, enter your email, and you'll pop right in with us here. We'll get to that in a couple minutes. But one thing I wanted to touch on that I mentioned on LinkedIn, and the post got some really good engagement, is one of the best things that you can do to prepare to navigate any reorg or layoff is to build financial resilience. And probably career book even, right? But that is the most important thing that you can do, is build financial resilience. So what do I mean by financial resilience, right? Financial resilience is the first step to financial independence, but it's kind of table stakes. It's having a clear understanding of what your life costs. How much money are you spending on a month? What are the things that you could cut if you needed to, right? You probably can't cut your rent, but you can cut eating out, or ordering Uber Eats, right? So what are those things that you can do there? And then having a clear picture of your finances. How much do you have? Where are your investments? What are all those things, right? Highly recommend a book called The Simple Path to Wealth. And of course, you can also watch J.L. Collins on my podcast. I don't know exactly what episode it is, but we'll put that in the show notes so people can check that out. But if you just search J.L. Collins Mindful Fire Podcast, it'll come up on YouTube or on the podcast. That'll walk you through exactly that. But again, the way you build financial resilience is avoid debt, know how much your life costs, and of course, within that, spend less than you make, and then have a clear vision for your life, right? When the last year I had at Google was very challenging, right? Had been reorged to a team with a manager who I was not vibing with. We'll leave it at that. We weren't vibing. And the thing that kept me going was knowing that I didn't need the money, right? I have an emergency fund, right? That's the third thing on the list, is have an emergency fund. Have 3-6 months expenses, building on knowing how much your life costs. Have that in the bank so that you know that you can deal with whatever comes. And J.L. Collins calls this FU money, right? If you once you are on the path to financial independence, once you have a clear understanding of what your life costs, how much money you have, and you have 6 months living expenses in the bank, you can take bigger risks. You can navigate anything that comes your way. At last several years, Google's done layoffs in the beginning of the year. I was not worried at all. Some might even call it hopeful to be laid off. And most people aren't in that situation, but I was not worried. I could navigate whatever was coming. And when I got into a situation that was very challenging, knowing that gave me the confidence to pursue my vision full steam, right? I knew that I needed to, it was now or never to make this happen. And I went and I pitched the President of the Americas about leading my workshop, and ultimately got a pilot for that. And I would not, most people in the situation I was in would have been worried about paying the mortgage. And that's the reality for a lot of people, right? And I, didn't have a tech startup. I mean, I did work at Google, that helps. But having financial resilience, building that muscle, and having that money in the bank was one of the core things that helped me through that challenging situation and allowed me to move into this next chapter of early semi-retirement without worries and knowing what I was moving towards.
Yeah. And I think even if, we're fortunate to have, we both worked in big tech and we have that luxury, but even for people that don't work in environments like that, it is still possible to have a backup plan. And the way that I always suggest people do that is start a side hustle. Right? Like, you can always make extra money. And this is another thing that people forget about very easily, is like they feel like they have to just take this predictable path. I have to work in an office. I have to work in a 9 to 5. It's very structured. The thing is, like, even if you're successful in a corporation, like, there's a ceiling. Very few people are able to get to the level where they're making like millions of dollars a year, unless you're working on Wall Street as like a managing director or something. So it's always possible to make more money. It just might not look like what you think it'll look like. Again, it just goes back to the idea of being open to possibility. Open up your mind and think that way, and then you'll see opportunities around you everywhere that maybe aren't like what you thought your life might look like or your career might look like. But you can literally design your career in any way that you want. And I think more and more people are starting to do that now, because the job market's so unpredictable, and there aren't as many jobs as there were before.
Yeah, there certainly aren't, and they're certainly not as secure as they once were, right? Google,
100%.
we used to, before January 2023, we thought this is the safest place to be. Right.
Right. I was like, I'm retiring here.
That's right. And then 12,000 people were laid off in the middle of the night. Right. So that's going to happen. Yesterday was 14,000 at Amazon. Right. So like, I love what you said about having a side hustle, and that can be related to your core job, or that skill set. Right. Could be consulting on product things if you're a product manager, or it could be completely different. You could drive for Uber Eats. You could drive for Uber. You could babysit dogs. This guy I know in my father's group. Start a dropship company. I know people who have done all of these things. A guy I work with a friend of mine in my father's group turned his backyard into a dog park. And has dogs there all the time. He didn't want. He's amazing. Like, my kid wants a dog. I don't want a dog. And he basically now has dogs there all the time, and makes money doing it with minimal effort. Right. So there's all sorts of ways. I've done, consulting stuff. I've done, obviously, the podcast and coaching and all these things. And each time I've moved closer to getting clear on what I want my, retirement to look like. And I've also made money that has accelerated my path to retirement. And so it's a win-win in terms of clarity and finances. All right, so let's get into the Q&A here. But before we do, I just want to invite you, Chealsea, to share with the audience where can they connect with you? How can they find that resource you mentioned? Again, anything that you want to share and plug for the audience.
Yeah, so the resource that I mentioned, Adam dropped in the studio chat. You can also find that in my link in bio in Instagram. My Instagram handle is Chealsea_W_. And just so you know, my name is spelled with two A's, Chealsea. It's not a misspelling. That's the way it's actually spelled. So you can check me out on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn, just my first name, Chealsea. And I post a ton of content around all of the topics that we talked about today. And my big sort of thing that I'm talking a lot about right now is this idea of aligned ambition, working from a place of alignment, which really means like working in a way that actually feels good to you and that's not driven by fear and scarcity.
I love that. Yeah, that aligned ambition, that resonates a lot. I like the sound of that. All right, well, let's do the Q&A. We got some people here in the studio with us. Remind me, Chealsea, what does that button say? It says like
It
send in a call
says,
in.
yeah, live call, some kind of live call.
Yeah, you
I
sent
took a
you sent it.
screenshot.
You did. I'm gonna look it up.
Yes.
But if you see the button that says live call in, you did send me this, and let's see. I got it here. Okay, request live call in. So if you are on the live stream with us and you want to ask a question, hit request a live call in.
Yeah, and we'd love to talk to you all, so don't be shy.
Yeah. Who's going to be first?
I mean, I would love to hear from someone about what parts of this conversation resonated with them and, what could
Yeah.
they relate to. I would be so interested to hear that.
And if you don't want to come directly on screen, which you're welcome to, you can also put your question or comments in the chat as well. So what's resonated with you in this conversation? Or what questions might you have? All right. While you're thinking of your questions, because I know you're thinking of your questions, I'm going to ask Chealsea the Mindful Fire Final Four. Okay? So, Chealsea, we're going to switch gears now into the Mindful Fire Final Four. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. First question, Chealsea, is all about envisioning. We've talked a lot about vision today and thinking bigger about the vision for your life. I'm curious, what is the vision for your life, for the next, say, 5 years of your life and what you're creating?
So, my vision is to transition full time to public speaking, coaching, and digital course creation, and basically fund my life that way. And yeah, I'm focusing, work with all kinds of people, but my primary focus is on helping women create their most aligned, elevated careers. And I do that by teaching them about neuroscience, doing inner work with them, and then also wealth consciousness. So being able to do that 100% and not have to hold down a 9 to 5 is my ultimate vision. And I think about that every day and practice the way I want to feel.
I love it. And how do you want to feel?
Free, abundant, and fulfilled. I want to really have my work be of high service because I think it's really important. Like a lot of women, especially in tech, feel intimidated. They make themselves small. So I really want to help them feel empowered so that they can show up as like their full selves and, rise up to whatever career level they want to be at, whether that's within a 9 to 5 structure or to be an entrepreneur.
I love it. That sounds awesome. And I know you are well on your path there. But I also know that you got the East River behind you, and you have a beautiful apartment that I can't imagine is cheap. So you're building
I have
towards
my work
it.
cut out for me. Yeah.
You're building towards it. But you've
Yeah.
been doing it for a while, and I'm sure that this has guided your actions for quite a while. So
100%.
I can't wait to congratulate you on that happening.
Thank you.
Question number 2 is, what piece of advice would you give to someone early on their path to financial independence?
Oh, that's a good one. I think A lot of people, when they think of financial independence, think more of, again, the logistics as opposed to the feeling. But I'll just, a quick fun fact, maybe not so fun fact about me. I grew up in West Virginia, in Appalachia, and my father and grandfather were coal miners. And so I come from a really working class background. And part of your ability to build wealth has to do with what you believe you deserve. So if you come from an environment where you feel less than, or you have class shame, which I did, you just assume that nice things aren't available to you. So really getting in touch with sort of like, what are your stories about money? Like, do you have shame associated with it? Are you afraid of it? Are you afraid that you'll lose it, you can't manage it, or you have to work really hard to get it? Until you think about those or become aware of those stories, it's possible for you to unconsciously block your ability to acquire wealth because you're self-sabotaging, because you think, oh, I don't deserve a nice life, or I don't deserve money. Then you'll spend it as fast as you can get it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, again, kind of getting to what we were talking about before, like how you untangle that is through coaching, through journaling, and just really trying to understand, like, what are these beliefs that I have that are underlying, and what are these feelings that I'm carrying?
Right.
Because
100%.
they could be preventing you from, getting the money you need to live the life you want because you don't feel like you deserve it.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned my apartment. Like, I lived in a similar place before this one. And I remember the first time when I went to rent that place, I was sitting in the rental office, and in my mind I was like, there's no way they're going to rent me this place, even though like I had good credit and I worked at Google,
Right.
and like,
Yeah, you had
and then
it
I
all, yeah.
walked out being like, wait, what? And that was the first time I became aware of that mindset that was related to the class structure.
Right.
It was a big breakthrough for me.
Yeah. That's really interesting that you had such a distinct moment where it's like,
Yeah.
yes, that's great. I mean, that's freeing. That's freeing. It's
It
so
is.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. The third question is, what piece of advice would you give to someone getting started with meditation and or mindfulness?
Well, the one thing I would say is that a lot of people, when they think about meditation, they think, oh, it's going to take a lot of time. I used to think that. And, meditation, I cannot like iterate enough how like powerful it is when it comes to calming your nervous system and also organizing your mind and eliminating that spiral. I used to be like a highly anxious person, and now I've been meditating for like 8 years, and it's just phenomenal how much it's calmed my brain. But for a long time, I didn't start because it seemed really daunting or overwhelming. And I would tell myself, oh, I can't meditate. That's what a lot of people say. I can't sit still, but you can. And the thing is you can start small. And I think with any change that you make, the key is to do it incrementally. So it doesn't have to be this big thing. Like, just start with 30 seconds. Just start with 60 seconds. Whatever it is, anybody can sit still for 60 seconds. And if you do that, you can do 60 seconds 3 times a day. And that's actually really powerful. It still has the same effect. I mean, obviously, the longer you do it, the better, but I only do it for 10 or 15 minutes a day. And it helps, and it adds up over time. So I think, first of all, stop saying that you can't do it, because you can. I mean, if
Unhelpful
you
story.
say, right, exactly. And then the second thing is to remind yourself that you can start small. You don't have to go from 0 to 100. Like, starting small doesn't mean you can't do it or that you're a failure at it.
Yeah. Great advice. Absolutely. I always say, like, the best amount of meditation to do is the one you'll actually do.
Right.
Like, what are you
Right, right.
actually going to do that it's no problem at all? So start with a minute, start with 2 minutes every day. It's not about how much you do, it's about how consistently you do it.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
all
and
right.
it's like
And
that with anything, right? It's
of
all about
course, yeah,
consistency.
it's all about practice, right? Like
Right.
everything that we've ever done, we've started off being terrible at. And, I think another tip I'd add is, like, when you're meditating and your mind wanders, don't think you're doing it wrong. Most people think that they're doing it wrong. I certainly did, and actually gave up for a while because I thought, oh, there's no way I can do this. But that is going to happen. So expect it to happen. And that in my experience, that's very freeing. That knowing it's going to happen, and then I'm just noticing and bringing it back, noticing and bringing it back. It's like doing a bicep curl for your brain, and your brain, the neurocircuitry of focus, attention, concentration, all of those things are strengthened each time your mind wanders and you bring it back. So it's not a problem. It's actually a core
Yeah,
part of the
it's
practice.
normal. Yeah,
It's normal. Yeah. That's
yeah.
our minds create thoughts. That's like literally what they do.
That's the job of it.
That's true. And again, want to invite anyone. Does anyone have any questions? Would anyone like to join us on stage and say hello or ask a question or share a reflection?
See, we still have people in the
I
event.
know you're here. I see you. Would love to talk with you, but I understand if you don't want to come up. It's okay. But thank you for being here. All right, so let's. And the fourth question, Chealsea, is just again, how can people connect with you online and follow along with what you're doing?
Yeah, the best I would say is Instagram. I'm unfiltered there. LinkedIn, I kind of tone it down a little bit because there's a lot of colleagues on there, and I feel like the people that follow me on Instagram, if they're colleagues, they know what I'm doing. So Chealsea underscore W underscore. That's IG. And then if you do want to see me on LinkedIn, it's just my first name. Also, website chelseaw.com. Join my mailing list. Yeah, I have lots of free workbooks on my LinkedIn bio and Instagram. And I also actually create digital courses. I have all sorts of courses for helping people level up in their career using this inner work and neuroscience and mindfulness approach as opposed to just burning themselves out and without boundaries.
Yeah, that's important stuff. And yeah, I know you put out a lot of great content. I love following you on both platforms. And well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And yeah, for me, if people want to connect with me, you can follow me on LinkedIn, Adam Coelho, Coelho. And if you are interested in landing your reorg in 2 to 3 weeks instead of 6 to 9 months, if you're interested in if you're interested in landing your reorg in 2 to 3 weeks instead of 6 to 9 months, I invite you to connect with me for a no obligation fit call where we'll just chat about your situation. No sales pitch, just truly getting to know each other and seeing if my Ask What's Possible workshop can help your team rebuild psychological safety and align to a big shared vision so that you can get back to work and crush it in the next chapter of your team. Thank you so much, Chealsea, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for watching in live. And those of you who joined us in the audience here in the room, really appreciate you being here and wish you all the best.
Thanks so much, Adam. This was great. I had so much fun chatting with you. And thanks to everyone who joined.
All right, we're going to go off the air now. And how do I do that? Here it is.